It is midnight in Washington, 5 in London, and 2 on a Wednesday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Kwon-young. Let's go check out the main stories we're following at this hour. North and South Korea are currently meeting in the truce village of Panmunjom to discuss holding reunions between families separated by the Korean War. Our correspondent, we will connect live with her at the Unification Ministry. Seoul's top economic policymaker vows to step up market monitoring as financial markets in both emerging and advanced economies show signs of instability. And the international community may slowly be beginning to put pressure on Japan to face up to its history as Tokyo marches on with its righteous moves that are upsetting its Asian neighbors. We'll have those stories and more, but this just coming in, Korea's presidential office of Cheongwade announced just minutes ago that it has named Min Kyung-uk, a senior reporter and former anchor at Korea Broadcasting System, as its new spokesman. The presidential office said President Park Geun-hye appointed the 51-year-old Min based on his years of journalistic experience as a foreign correspondent and TV anchor. Now, Min's appointment resolves an over 1 month-long vacancy since former spokesperson Kim Hae-in left office, citing personal reasons at the end of last year. Moving on, officials from the two Koreas have been locked in working-level talks on this Wednesday to discuss the details for resuming reunions for families separated since the Korean War. Now, the reunions, if held, would be the first in more than 3 years. For more, let's go live to our correspondent Hwang Sung-hee at Seoul's Unification Ministry. So, Sung-hee, it's a big day for the two Koreas. So what details do we have right now?
Hi, Kwon-young. It's been about 4 hours since the working level talks began this morning, and officials have apparently skipped their lunch break and have been engaged in negotiations. Now, no details about what was discussed have been released yet, so we don't know if we should take this as a good sign or a bad one. But opening the talks at the truce village of Panmunjom earlier this morning, the chief delegates from the two Koreas agreed that they should, as the Red Cross delegations, lead the way for improving inter-Korean ties. The two sides, however, may have a long day ahead of them as they will be sorting out details, such as the date and the location of the reunion. South Korea had earlier proposed holding the event from February 17th to the 22nd at North Korea's Mount Kumgang Resort, but this may not be a viable option anymore as officials in Seoul say they need at least 2 weeks to prepare. Now, another issue is that North Korea will most likely want to push the date back to sometime after joint military drills between South Korea and the United States, which is scheduled to begin late this month. Experts say the North could make a counter-proposal on the reunion dates that would have the event taking place sometime after the key resolve and full legal exercises, which end in April. Kwon-young?
Now, Sang-hee, we have seen North Korea back out of agreements many times in the past. Now, is there a vibe that Pyongyang might once again have a sudden change of heart and scrap plans for the family reunions?
Well, Kwon-young, that's a very difficult question to answer because, of course, North Korea is one of the most unpredictable regimes in the world. But yes, we have seen North Korea break its promises many times before. And just last year, we saw North Korea walk out of its agreement to resume family reunions at the very last minute, which was a disappointment to hundreds of divided family members. Now, experts that I've spoke with say such a scenario is very likely this time around as well. Now, that is if South Korea and the United States push ahead with their joint military drills. They say the North may call off the reunions and blame it on the South for sticking to its aggressive nature despite North Korea's willingness to improve relations. Seoul maintains that humanitarian issues like the family reunions should be dealt with separately from military drills. So, Kwon-young, there is still a tug of war going on between the two Koreas, and we are still uncertain about North Korea's intentions. But one thing to keep in mind is that hundreds of thousands of divided families are waiting to reunite for the first time in more than 6 decades, and time is running out for these very elderly divided family members to see their loved ones again one last time. Kwon-young?
Definitely so, and we will be keeping our fingers crossed for that. Thank you, Sung-hee. That was our Hwang Sung-hee from the Unification Ministry reporting on the ongoing working level talks between the two Koreas and resuming the long suspended family reunions. While the two Koreas are moving toward improving relations, there hasn't been much progress on international efforts to denuclearize North Korea. Now, Washington and Pyongyang remain divided over when and how to restart the stalled six-party denuclearization talks. Connie Kim reports.
The United States has once again firmly laid out its demand that North Korea take the initial steps towards denuclearization in order to resume the six-party talks. At a press briefing in Washington Tuesday, Daniel Russell, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia, said talks with North Korea should focus on denuclearizing the Korean peninsula and should not be talks for talk's sake. He also said Washington stands ready to negotiate with Pyongyang, but only on the basis of a statement signed in 2005. Under the landmark deal, Pyongyang agreed to scrap its nuclear program in return for security, economic, and energy benefits. However, the North failed to abide by the agreement, carrying out 3 nuclear bomb tests between 2006 and 2013. Russell's comments echo those made by Glenn Davies, the U.S. envoy on North Korea, who said last week that the six-party denuclearization talks will not resume unless Pyongyang changes its policy direction. The U.S. and North Korea remain at odds as Pyongyang has not shown any change in its position in recent years. Speaking in Moscow on Tuesday, the North Korean ambassador to Russia said the chance of resuming the talks was fading away because of Washington's hostile policy towards the North. The six-party talks involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia have not been held since late 2008. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Now, at the National Assembly yesterday, we saw the chief of the ruling party giving an address to the National Assembly. And today, on this Tuesday, the rival party's spokesman or the party chair has spoken. The head of the main opposition Democratic Party delivered his keynote speech on this Wednesday, and Kim Han-gil vowed to reform politics and push for narrowing the gap between the haves and have-nots. Our National Assembly correspondent Kim Hyun-ji reports.
Addressing the full assembly and members of President Park Geun-hye's cabinet on Wednesday, Democratic Party chief Kim Han-gil said his party will be at the forefront of reforming parliament and party politics.
We will push for the passage of our bill aimed at preventing lawmakers from abusing their privileges. For this, we will work towards setting up an independent ethics committee that can keep a watch on lawmakers and execute the contents of this bill.
Earlier this week, the Democratic Party leadership issued a political reform proposal that centers around scrapping the privileges of lawmakers and includes having all lawmakers report to an independent ethics committee their plans for overseas travel and commemoration ceremonies for the publication of their books. Kim also called for a rigorous reform of the parliamentary system itself. Specifically, he proposed having the parliament open year-round, operating the parliament's budget committee at all times, and constantly carrying out a parliamentary audit of the government. Kim said his party will fight the government's downsized basic old-age pension plan, saying President Park must fulfill her original pledge to give all senior citizens aged 65 and above 200,000 won or $185 every month. He also said his party opposes the government's policy to allow hospitals to form for-profit subsidiaries, saying the healthcare sector should be made more public, not less. He stressed that reunification with North Korea is not something that can be obtained overnight.
President Park said reunification will be like a jackpot that has created a rosy fantasy that reunification will come easy and quickly. I am concerned about this situation.
Saying the public needs to agree on how to prepare for a peaceful reunification with North Korea, the Democratic Party chief called for the establishment of a preparatory body comprised of the government, lawmakers, and civic leaders. Kim Hyun-ji, ARIRANG News.
Now, the Korean government is planning to do more to foster provincial universities in the coming 5 years. The Education Ministry announced Wednesday that it would dedicate over $1 trillion won, that's roughly $930 million or billion that is, as part of a 5-year plan to nurture provincial universities starting this year. About 60 to 70 universities located outside of urban areas are expected to benefit from this program. The government will also cut admissions at the participating universities by 20,000 at most. The ministry will accept applications for the program until the end of April, and the universities will be selected in June. Now, emerging markets have been hit by jitters caused by the U.S. Federal Reserve's tapering of its stimulus, and now mixed economic data from the U.S. and China are complicating the situation. And with Korea still classified as an emerging market, how is this country faring, and is it really safe from becoming engulfed in future shocks? Our Yudian reports.
Is Korea headed for a crisis along with other emerging market economies, or will it differentiate itself from the rest of the pack? While Korea has come under a major sell-off by foreign investors, it still seems to be taking a different path from that of developing economies. The benchmark Kospi closed at a 5-month low on Tuesday, and offshore investors sold a net $1.4 billion worth of Kospi stocks in January. But on the bond market, foreigners kept buying Korean securities, $1.6 billion worth in the same period, some $200 million more than the amount they sold in the stock market. Korea's credit default swap premium for its sovereign bonds, which shows a country's default risk, also stands much lower than that of other emerging market economies, at 75.5. This is compared to India's 275.4 and Indonesia's 235.2. Korea also has an ample amount of foreign currency reserves, as it has posted current account surpluses for the past 24 months. On top of that, there is Korea's large foreign exchange reserves, which hit a record high last month. Data from the Bank of Korea showed that the reserves had reached $348 billion as of January, up nearly $2 billion from the previous month. But while Korea's economic fundamentals are relatively sound, its large and liquid stock market makes it easier for foreign investors to cash out their investments. Experts warn that since foreign investors hold a huge proportion of Korean stocks and bonds, if they are spooked by a crisis affecting emerging markets, Korea may have to brace itself for a major market shakeup. Citing recent signs of instability seen both in advanced and emerging countries, Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok said Wednesday that Korea will step up its market monitoring so it can react quickly to minimize the impact of any external shocks to the nation's economy. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
Well, however, for the time being, the local bourse here in Korea seems to be faring pretty well midway along the week, with bargain hunters lifting shares from a 5.5-month low in early trading, tracking a lead from Wall Street. But sentiment remained fragile as concerns about the global growth outlook persisted. As of 1:30 p.m. Korea time, the benchmark Kospi was up 0.4%, trading at 1895. Now, the Kospi had retreated 2.8% in the past two sessions to position at the lowest level not seen since late August. The tech-heavy Kosdaq was also up by 0.1%, while on the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency was trading stronger against the greenback at roughly 1,080 won. Meanwhile, Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, Korea's two largest automakers, posted record sales in China in January, helped by demand for popular models. The two companies' joint ventures in China say that their combined sales reached a monthly high of more than 175,000 units in January, up 7% from last year. Well, the automakers attributed the record figures to a rise in sales of Hyundai's Santa Fe and Kia's K3. Meanwhile, Hyundai and Kia saw their combined sales in the U.S. reach over 81,000 last month, jumping 1% from last year. The figure is in contrast to overall sales of new cars in the U.S., which dropped 3% in January from the year before.
All of the day's important events. Events close to home, around the world.
Second half last, figure out what winners.
The arts and culture scene and the heart of global business.
Experts added that
ARIRANG News has your whole day covered.
the legislature will convene a plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government.
Now, Korea and Japan have been locked in a renewed diplomatic spat over Japan's distorted views on history. With relations between the two countries at their lowest point in years, some politicians and ambassadors of foreign countries have joined Korea in calling on Japan to sincerely apologize for its wartime atrocities. Shin Se-min reports.
Politicians and envoys from countries far and wide have been taking Japan to task for its renewed glorification or attempted whitewashing of its past wrongdoings. Influential figures from nations including the United States and Britain have called on Tokyo to issue a clear and frank apology for its wartime atrocities. They specifically want Japan to apologize for its military wartime use of sex slaves and for Japanese lawmakers' continued visit to a war shrine that honors several Class A war criminals. A congressman from California, Mike Honda, recently sent a letter to Secretary of State John Kerry urging him to pay closer attention to the issue of the so-called comfort women who were forced to provide sexual services to Japanese troops during the World War II. Honda has consistently pushed for Japan to apologize, calling it a human rights matter, not something that should just be consigned to history. In his letter to Kerry, Honda calls on him to encourage Tokyo to apologize to the sex slave victims who were thought to have numbered as many 200,000, with many of those from Korea. The letter also points out that more and more are passing away in a reminder that time is limited for the remaining survivors to receive their long-delayed apology. He said that although some believe Japan has already issued an apology, it is clear the Japanese government has not done enough to apologize to the victims. The British ambassador to Japan, Tim Hitchens, also urged Japan this week to admit its historical wrongdoings and to improve its relations with its neighbors. At a conference in Tokyo Monday, Hitchens indirectly asked Prime Minister Shinzo Abe not to visit the controversial Yasukuni Shrine again, saying the best way for Japan to correct its historical mistakes is to admit what it did wrong. Abe visited the Yasukuni Shrine in December last year, marking the first time in 7 years that a sitting Japanese Prime Minister has visited the shrine. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
And adding to that, Japan is about to stir even more controversy about its militaristic past, this time by submitting an application to register suicide notes and letters written by its wartime suicide bombers on the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. Local reports say officials in the city of Minami-Kyushu are pushing to enlist more than 330 messages written by the kamikaze pilots on the UNESCO list in 2015. Now, the region was a base for kamikaze pilots who carried out suicide attacks against U.S. vessels during World War II. Japan had previously tried to enlist Kyushu and Yamaguchi, where Koreans were forced to work in labor camps during Japan's colonial rule of Korea, as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se on Tuesday said enlisting the industrial sites would go against the basic ethics and principles of UNESCO World Heritage. On a different note, 2 days ahead of the opening ceremony for the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics, the symbol of the Games, the Olympic flame, will arrive in the host city on this Wednesday evening local time, ending its 4-month journey. Now, the flame traveled 65,000 kilometers in the hands of 14,000 torchbearers, the longest stretch in Olympic history, climbing mountains, plunging into a deep lake, and even making its first journey into space on a Russian spacecraft. Well, with the torch approaching its destination, Olympic spirit is surging despite the recent terrorist acts in Russia and threats ahead of the big event. The Austria Olympic Committee said on Tuesday that it has received a letter that threatened to kidnap 2 of its athletes. Now, Russia and the International Olympic Committee have assured all athletes and spectators will be safe. And Ban Ki-moon will become the first UN chief to give a keynote speech to the International Olympics Committee's General Assembly this week before attending the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in Sochi on Friday. Now, IOC President Thomas Bach said he is honored the UN chief accepted the sports governing body's invitation. Ban is expected to speak about the role of the IOC in sports and society and the relationship between the IOC and the United Nations. And now it's time for our arts and culture segment with our Lee Tae-ho. And today being Wednesday, he will bring us updates on the latest music news. So good afternoon to you, Tae-ho.
Good afternoon, Hyundai.
So you have some great new albums to tell us all about today.
That's right, and I also have our weekly K-pop Top 10. But before that, let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at some of the great new albums by very talented artists from all around the world. A lone stranger roaming the streets of the cities of the world with nothing but his mandolin. That concept was the inspiration for the new album by Grammy-nominated mandolinist Avi Avital, Between Worlds, which brings together some of the best folk music from around the globe, played mainly on the mandolin. Stretching the possibilities of the little instrument that could, it also offers sounds it was never meant to produce. The songs from the album are also surrounded by clusters of sound produced by string instruments, percussion instruments, and occasionally even the accordion.
I didn't want it to be neither folk, neither classical, but always to be like in between, to give also the listener the freedom to have his own associations.
One of the greatest bands of all time, the Beatles, is celebrating the 50th anniversary of its US debut. It all started in New York when they arrived to the cheers of thousands of screaming fans, signaling the start of the British invasion. They would go on to perform all over the US, with their US album sales representing 50% of all album sales in the US that year. And for this, their golden anniversary, all 13 Beatles albums released in America, starting with the 1964 album Meet the Beatles, have been re-released in a 13-CD box set featuring the original cover art. And the Grammy Awards may be over, but those of you wanting more of this year's best in music should not despair. There's a new compilation album featuring all of the Grammy-nominated songs for your listening pleasure.
Well, going back to the first piece of news, that's a very interesting twist to classical music, the mandolin.
Definitely something that you don't often see. A mandolin as part of an orchestra setup, basically with strings and percussions, performing with to a variety of different music, folk music, and even his first album was Bach's Concerto. So it's a very interesting twist to a lot of different genres of music, but nonetheless, a talented genius with the mandolin in his hands.
Definitely so. And, you know, for some of us who are looking for something unique or different to listen to, I think this is definitely the one to listen to. But of course, you have the latest updates from the K-pop chart, right?
That's right. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at all of the latest and greatest K-pop hits from this last week. Here we go. And for the first week of the Year of the Blue Horse, we kick off this week's edition of our weekly countdown at number 10 with the ladies of AOA heating things up with their sexy new track, Miniskirt. And up a whopping 16 spots from last week is musician Demi Lovato at number 9 with her rendition of Let It Go on the soundtrack of the animated film Frozen. And at number 8 this week is the single I Love You by Just, the soundtrack of the popular drama You Who Came From the Stars. And at lucky number 7 are the ladies of Spica with You Don't Love Me. Roaring up the charts to number 6, we find Kristen Bell's For the First Time in Forever, which is also from Frozen. Also up 7 spots to land at number 5 is Santino Fontana's Love is an Open Door, also from the Frozen soundtrack. And at number 4 is Hyorin's single Hello Goodbye. And at number 3 we find Kind's hot new track featuring Bumkey. And the runner-up this week at number 2 is Kristen Bell once again, this time with the song, Do You Want to Build a Snowman? And for the number 1 song of the week, we once again find yet another song from the soundtrack to Frozen, Let It Go, performed by Idina Menzel, which makes this her 9th straight week at the top.
Well, very interesting to see Frozen sweeping the K-pop charts as well as among others. Now, so thank you for that, Tae-ho, and we will speak to you tomorrow about other arts and culture news, right?
All right.
Let's now turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center for the latest forecast. Michelle, it feels like the weather is a tad bit warmer than yesterday.
That's right, Kanyang. The cold wave advisory has been lifted. However, the dry weather advisory still remains.
That's good to hear, and I hope it stays warm like this.
Well, in fact, the winter weather is going to slowly start to go away starting tomorrow. But for now, the temperature and the cold wind has eased and will keep warming up throughout the day. For more details, let's move over to our satellite map. As you can see, we have some clouds over the nation. However, we are going to get some snow or rain over the weekend all over the nation as well. Now, going over to the readings, the temperatures around the nations are above zero. Seoul will top out at 1 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will both peak at 4 degrees respectively. Now down on Jeju Island, we can expect some snow. Dokdo will get up to -3, while Mankumgang tops out at -7. Well, that's all I have for you. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Kanyang.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for that. And that's all from me at this hour. I will be back with more of the day's latest at 4 p.m. Korea time. See you then.